Welcome back. This course is about Step 4 of the Open Standards for the Practice of Conservation, or the Conservation Standards for short. To recap, the Conservation Standards provide a step-by-step adaptive management approach that helps teams draw on existing evidence and knowledge to design, implement, monitor, and evaluate conservation projects. The conservation standards also help teams generate evidence and learn from their own monitoring results so that they can swiftly adapt to changes and new information. This Step 4 course will teach you how to reflect on your team's overall project progress and context, drawing on your monitoring data and any new knowledge that you've gained since your team started designing and implementing your project. This course focuses on the Analyze and Adapt step of the conservation standards and will provide you with vital skills for using monitoring data and new information to adapt your plan as needed and to improve your conservation efforts. We are now in Module 2, in which you will learn how to prepare your data for analysis to help you track project implementation and context. In this module, we'll begin to dive deeper into how to generate evidence for adaptive management of your conservation plan. We'll talk about what is adaptive management and how to prepare the data you'll need to inform adaptive management decisions. We'll also discuss how to clean, prepare, and process data that is related to tracking completion of project actions, including implementation and monitoring activities, and also data that's related to tracking new information about changes in project context. By the end of this module, you'll be able to demonstrate the following skills and competencies. You'll be able to describe how a results chain that depicts your theory of change can help you track your activity progress to inform adaptive management. You'll be able to outline steps to systematically clean, record, and store project data on implementation progress and new information or other related factors. And finally, to be able to use Meraki and other data storage systems to track progress towards completion of project activities and changes in project context. As you recall from Module 1, in the Analyze and Adapt step of the conservation standards, we prepare data, analyze results, and adapt our plans accordingly. In this module and in Module 3, we'll focus on the first bullet point in this step, which is prepare data. Preparing your data correctly will ensure that your team is able to analyze project progress and determine if and how to adapt your plan going forward. This is an essential part of practicing adaptive management. We are now at the beginning of our Step 4 journey, which is preparing our project data for analysis. We'll learn how to systematically clean and prepare data for entry. And in this module, we'll learn how to track progress towards completion of actions. In the next module, we'll learn how to track progress towards the achievement of results, objectives, and goals. At the end of our Step 4 journey is adaptive management, which means using the results from our analysis of these data to make decisions and adapt management as needed to improve strategy effectiveness. As you may recall from Module 1, adaptive management is an intentional approach to improving strategy effectiveness. Adaptive management is a deliberate approach to making decisions about adjustments to your conservation plan in response to new information that you may gather from existing sources or new research, as well as evidence you may generate as you implement your monitoring plan or detect changes in project context. In this module, you'll learn how to clean and record the various types of project data that your team acquires so that you are available for analysis and will provide you with the right information for making adaptive management decisions. Okay, let's get started by looking at the different types of project data you'll need to assess the effectiveness of your strategy. There are three main types of monitoring questions that you and your team should ask when assessing effectiveness of your strategies. First, have there been any changes in context? And if so, what? And how might these changes have influenced your observed results? And how should they be considered in your project design going forward? Secondly, did we do what we said we would to implement our planned activities? If not, why not? And third, are we achieving the expected outcomes? And if not, why not? Each question requires compiling and tracking different types of data. In this module, we'll learn how to track and prepare the data needed to answer questions 1 and 2. In the next module, we'll learn how to track and prepare the data needed to answer question 3. Well, let's start with question 1 about any changes in project context. For this first question, we need to track and prepare any information that we uncover about the status of or relationship between factors in our situation analysis. For example, in our situation analysis, we may have had some uncertainty or lack of information about the status of a conservation target, the ranking of threats, or the relevant effect of contributing factors on each direct threat. We also need to track and prepare information about any new factors that may be influencing the outcomes depicted in our theories of change. For example, there may have been changes in our project situation since we first developed our strategic plan. Perhaps a new threat or a driver of a threat is impacting one of our conservation targets. It's important to track these new events and consider if and how they should be addressed by our strategic plan. For example, this might be in the selection of strategies and the expected outcomes. To answer question 2, did we do what we said we would? We need to track and prepare data about progress towards completion of project activities, including implementation and monitoring activities. In addition to tracking your action progress, you'll also likely want to track the cost of implementing your actions. To answer our third question, which we'll address in the next module, Module 3, we'll need to track and prepare data on progress towards achievement of results and towards achievement of objectives and goals. Okay, let's start with the data needs for question number 1. We need to ask ourselves if there have been changes in the project context, and if so, what, and how might these have influenced your results? Data needs here are any new information about the status of or the relationship between related factors in your situation analysis or theories of change. We'll get to that second grayed out component in just a bit. In Module 6 of the Conservation Essentials Step 3 course, you may remember that we discussed how new information could result from actively pursuing that information during the course of implementing your project. We call this active pursuit. Or it could be new information that you happen to observe or hear about that you didn't know about when you were developing your strategic plan. We call this passive observation. It could also be something new that has occurred in your project area since you developed your plan. So as you learn, you'll need to revisit your situation analyses in your situation model and your intervention and theories of change as portrayed in your results chains to make updates as needed. In Marathi, you can simply add, remove, and/or revise factors in your situation model and results chains to reflect the new information you have gathered. As you might imagine, there are often dozens of potential factors that you need to consider. The trick, of course, is to select and track only the most important ones that help you understand and improve your strategies. This is similar to the choices you had to make when you were originally selecting the most critical factors to include in your situation model and results chain. Okay, one example of active pursuit of new information is that you may have conducted or commissioned a study to gather new data or synthesized existing data about an area of uncertainty in your situation model or in a results chain. Or perhaps you talked to an expert or looked up something on a reputable website. For example, as noted here in the green box, the Eastern Bay project team was initially uncertain if rats were the sole cause of seabird nest predation at their project site. To address this uncertainty, they pursued more information. They initiated a study from Wagner et al. 2023 to confirm that the main and perhaps the sole cause of problem in the region was because of rats. This could have been information that they gathered through a literature search or a phone call to an expert or even actual field research. Regardless of how they collected it, they can now update their diagrams with this new information. As a reminder, it's helpful to use some notation, like we see here, this exclamation point in the upper right. to remember this update when it comes time to discuss this new information with your team as part of your reflect and adapt process. Here's another example of new information about an existing factor that might come from what we described as passive observation that could change the context of a project. You may have an enabling condition in your results chain, like local government support, that you assumed would assist you in implementing your strategy. But after the most recent local government elections, many of the officials that initially supported your strategy were not reelected. The new local government officials are not supportive of your strategy, which may impact your ability to implement the strategy. Thus, this contributing factor shown in blue, local government support for intervention, should be modified in your situation model and associated results chain as now a limiting factor, an indirect threat, or possibly an area of uncertainty rather than enabling factor or an opportunity. As a result, your team should consider if you need a new strategy or an activity to address this change. Now let's look at information we have compiled about new factors that may be influencing the project context. One example of new information that came from passive observation could be something you heard or read about that's changed the context of your project. For example, the Eastern Bay project team just heard about a new threat. Here we see it, dam construction, on the horizon that was not there when they developed their situation model. To document this change in context, they simply added this new threat to their situation model. And here again, it's helpful to use some form of notation as we see that exclamation point to remember this update when it comes time to discuss this new information with your project team as part of your reflect and adapt process. Here's another example of tracking information about a new factor that might come from passive observation that could change the context of a project. In this case, our team has learned that a new conservation agency has just received funding to implement law enforcement in our project area. As a result, it's not necessary for our project team to implement the law enforcement actions that were planned. Thus, we can remove this strategy from the situation model, you see it with the red X here, and modify the result chain to focus on a different type of law enforcement action. Finally, here's some good practices for tracking new information. In most cases, you should process or record your information as soon as you get it. More likely than not, you will not be getting that information at a time that coincides with the timing at which you were recording data about progress towards implementation and results. But you don't want to forget this new information either when it comes to review it with your team during the next reflect and adapt process. So you could update your situation model and results chain right away to reflect the new information as you receive it, or you could also keep a change log as shown here to remind you of the key changes you made. Regardless of whether you keep a change log or you make your updates right away, you should record the sources for your new information and any changes or updates you make to the overall strategic plan. You'll want to come back to these during your reflect and adapt sessions. Next, let's discuss the preparation of data for answering question 2. Did we do what we said we would? And if not, why not? The first type of data we'll want to track is progress towards completion of project actions. That includes implementation activities and monitoring activities. As shown in this results chain, there are 3 types of project actions: strategies, implementation activities, and monitoring activities. In this module, we'll provide guidance on tracking each of these. Implementation and monitoring activities are nested within a strategy. Implementation activities are illustrated as these yellow bubbles in our results chain. These are actions that a project team implements to achieve project results. For example, a team may conduct a workshop or disseminate educational posters with the objective of achieving the result of increasing the skills or knowledge of a target audience. Monitoring activities, as shown here in the purple bubbles, in our results chain. These are actions that a project team implements to monitor change in an indicator associated with an objective or goal. Goals, objectives, and indicators are part of the project monitoring plan that you developed in Step 2 of the Conservation Standards process. In Module 6 of the Conservation Essentials Step 3 course, you may remember that we discussed the different systems you could use to store, manage, and record project data. This included implementation progress, tracking progress towards completion of your project actions. As we discussed in the Step 3 course, there are lots of ways to initially track project actions with your team. This can include spreadsheets like Excel or Google Sheets, a diagramming software, Miro or Mural, or even on sticky tarps or printouts, but ultimately these data will likely need to be recorded elsewhere for long-term storage and analysis. In the Step 4 course, you'll learn how to use Merati for tracking progress towards completing your project actions. You can do this using the desktop version of Merati or the online Merati Share editing capabilities. Okay, let's go to Merati Share now to see an example of how to enter progress updates on project actions for one of the strategies in our Eastern Bay Conservation Project. First, select the theory of change to see the results chains for this project. Results tracking allows you to track progress updates for your intermediate and threat reduction results. Select the results chain for which you wish to enter the progress update. For our example, we'll use the Campaign to Stop Shark Fin Soup strategy. Note that this results chain includes implementation activities in the yellow bubbles and monitoring activities in the purple bubbles. For our exercise, let's start by showing only the actions, implementation, and monitoring activities that we want to enter data for. You can hide the goals, objectives, and indicators by selecting visibility and then clicking on any factors you will like to hide. Now select the first implementation activity. Then click on the 3-dot symbol to open the factor properties box associated with this activity. Open Progress Updates in the Factors property box and click on Add Update to create a new progress update. Now you're ready to enter your new progress update in this screen. Your update should include the date of your update. Perhaps your team meets on a regularly scheduled day every quarter to enter their updates. If so, you'll want to make sure that the date is consistent with your regularly scheduled meeting dates. Ideally, you should work with your project team to enter a progress update for each activity at least once per year until an activity is completed. Some teams choose to review and update progress every quarter or every 6 months. This might be necessary for some strategies that are new or innovative and require more regular monitoring and adaptive management. As you go through these options with your team, make sure you select the correct option that best describes the status of each activity. Here you see the menu on the right-hand side with not specified, planned, major issues, etc. And most importantly, be sure that you provide details about why you've selected a status and if any adaptive management decisions are required. Let's now walk through these menu options in a little bit more detail. For example, here, if you had chosen major issues with an activity, this indicates that the activity has ongoing major issues that need attention. In the details frame of this status report, you'd want to describe the issues that need attention and provide any suggestions for corrective actions. If you select On Track for an activity, that indicates that the activity is ongoing and it's generally on track. In the details here, you'd want to describe any aspects of the activity that are underway. For example, a survey protocol completed. If you selected Not Known as the status, this indicates lack of sufficient information to assess progress status. In this case, in the details field, you'd want to explain why there's insufficient information to assess status, and then provide any suggestions for how to obtain this information for assessing progress in the future. What's important in tracking project actions is that everyone understands that the colors in these ratings are meant for your team to easily see how your activity implementation is progressing, that everyone on the team understands what the rating means, and third, that everyone uses the ratings consistently. This is really important. And finally, that the information included in the details field helps the team understand why an activity is progressing or not, and assists them in making good adaptive management decisions that inform work planning. And finally, don't forget to save your progress update when you're done filling out the boxes. Now you're ready to go back and use these steps to enter progress updates for all of your project actions. This pane in Marathi will stay on your screen as you click through the activities and the updates. And remember that this should include updates for both implementation activities, the yellow bubbles, and for monitoring activities, the purple bubbles. Now that you've seen how to track project actions in Marathi, let's take a quick look at another familiar tool for tracking implementation progress, a spreadsheet such as Excel or Google Sheets. You could recreate something that looks like what you might see in Marathi as shown here, or you could create a spreadsheet that's tailored to your own preferences. The nice thing about spreadsheets is that you can custom design them as you see fit. A drawback is that you may have project data stored in multiple places. For example, perhaps you do your planning in Marathi, but you move your tracking to Google Spreadsheets. So any changes you do in one place then would have to be manually replicated in the other system. So you should consider these implications carefully when you're choosing a system to manage and store implementation progress. Now let's take a look at the second part of question number 2. In addition to tracking progress towards completing your project actions, it may be helpful to track the costs of implementing your activities. This is a view of a high-level 4-year work plan and budget created in Marathi for a strategy to stop shark fin soup's demand from the Conservation Essentials Step 3 course. Many conservation organizations track this same type of information in Excel. Many organizations have an existing chart of accounts that they use to track staff time and other expenditures within their financial system. Often, however, these systems tend to code activities by standard accounting categories, such as staff time, consultant time, facilities, equipment, travel, etc., rather than by the specific implementation and monitoring activities that we can see here in your Marathi file. So you may need to work with your accounting colleagues to develop additional or substitute accounting codes that better link to your project activities. And these accounting codes can be incorporated into the timesheets that all your program team members fill out, as well as budget reports for program expenditures. Collecting and analyzing how much time and treasure you spend on each action will allow you to better track and adjust your resource assignments, create more accurate forward-looking budget estimates, and ultimately assess the cost effectiveness of different actions. For example, this business plan report comes from Bush Heritage in Australia, and it illustrates how tracking expected costs can be used in a cost-benefit analysis to determine how much it will cost to implement a strategy relative to the expected results to be achieved. This report provides a snapshot of budget and result details of a weed control strategy that's focused on the objective, as we can see here, of reducing the number of invasive weeds within a reserve's weed management zone relative to a 2016 baseline. The report shows that problem weeds have worsened, as we see up here in the threat ratings, since the 2016 baseline, and that reducing this threat is necessary for achieving the goal of recovering native vegetation to improve the viability of several of the reserve's ecosystem targets and to achieve their goals, as shown in the lower left. The two budget charts here on the right of the side of the report show the estimated expense of implementing the weed control strategy. Here in the lower right, the expense of implementing the weed control strategy over a 3-year period, and how the budgeted work days and expenses for the invasive weed control strategy compare to the cost of other strategies in the same reserve over the same 3 years, as we can see the invasive weed strategy here. This cost-benefit analysis helps the team to discuss a number of key questions. Are we focusing our resources on the areas of greatest need, as identified by the viability and threat ratings and related goals and objectives? Are we investing enough to have a good chance of achieving our objectives in the stated time frame? If not, could we increase the level of investment by reallocating resources from other activities? If not, can we find additional resources? Or if not, should we extend the objective time frame, as we see here, to have a good chance of achieving the objective? And what would be the consequences of this extension? This is another report from Bush Heritage in Australia. This is an annual project progress report, and it provides a snapshot showing how actual spending on a project compares to progress on strategy implementation. This chart here in the upper left shows how actual spending on each strategy, including our invasive weed control strategy, compares to what was budgeted for each strategy. So the green shows what has been spent, the black bar actually what was budgeted. From this report, we can see that our invasive weed control strategy was slightly over budget for the year, but overall, below, if we look at our actual year-to-date versus budget for all activities for this project, we can see that overall spending on all strategies is largely on track with the annual budget forecast. On the right-hand side of the report, we see progress reports on strategies and activities in the project. So we can see here that our weed control strategy, all of our activities are on track as compared to progress reports on the other strategies in this project. Here we see other strategies where they're having some minor issues or some activities that have not yet started. In the lower right here, we can see progress status details of all the activities being implemented as part of our weed control strategy. This project progress data helps the team to discuss a number of questions during the reflect and adapt process of the conservation standards, such as, are we doing what we set out to do? Are our activities broadly on track? Are our financial resources broadly on track? And if not, what should we do to correct the situation or adjust our plans? Okay, let's wrap up this module by recapping the best practices we discussed for managing your project data. First, it's critical that you manage all your project data as they come in so that they're clean, organized, and available for regular analysis. Secondly, be sure to keep a change log for any new information about changes in project context. Meet with your project team, all the individuals involved in implementing project activities, to ensure that everyone has a common understanding of the progress ratings for project actions and, most importantly, using the ratings consistently. It's also critical that your team includes details on progress updates. This information is needed to understand why an activity is progressing or not, and will help you determine if and what corrective action is needed. And finally, it's useful to work with an organization's accountant to set up accounting codes that allow you to track the costs of implementation by strategy. This can help you assess the cost effectiveness of different actions and inform your adaptive management decisions. In closing, here's a summary of what we've covered in this module. We learned how to track and prepare the data needed to answer the first two questions about the effectiveness of our strategy, including, are there any changes in project context, and if so, what are they, and how might they have influenced our observed results? Did we implement the activities that we said we would, and if not, why not? We learned how to track and prepare the data needed to answer questions 1 and 2, and we recapped our best practices. So in the next module, we'll learn how to track and prepare the data needed to answer question 3.